The mirror didn't betray me that day. It simply refused to lie. I remember standing perfectly still, one hand frozen on the bedroom doorknob, listening to the silence outside. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt peaceful. It was the kind that arrives after someone has already seen something they weren't supposed to see. The scarf I had awkwardly wrapped around my shoulders suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Then came the knock. Not loud, not angry, just 3 calm taps that somehow carried more weight than shouting ever could. "You can come out now." My older cousin's voice. No accusation, no laughter, just certainty. The kind that leaves no room for excuses. I closed my eyes, searching desperately for a believable explanation. Maybe I could say it was a joke. Maybe I could blame a costume challenge. Maybe I could pretend I had been cleaning out old clothes. Every excuse sounded weaker than the last. I opened the door. He looked at me for several long seconds before speaking. "So, you've been hiding this. Not what are you doing? Now why? Just, you've been hiding this." For some reason that hurt more. Because he wasn't questioning what he had seen. He already believed it. The mirror hanging behind me reflected everything. The uncertain expression on my face, the oversized cardigan draped over my shoulders, the trembling hands trying to straighten fabric that suddenly felt impossible to wear naturally. That mirror would become my enemy, and eventually my greatest teacher. At the time, though, it only reflected shame. "I can explain." Those were the first words I managed. He smiled, not cruelly but knowingly. "You've probably spent years explaining this to yourself." I had no answer. Because he was right. For years, I had lived inside 2 different versions of myself. One version wore confidence like armor. The other appeared only when every curtain was closed and every lock was checked twice. One version laughed loudly. The other whispered. One belonged to everyone else. The other only existed in reflections. Some people collect photographs. I collected moments. 5 quiet minutes after everyone left the house. 10 careful minutes before bedtime. A stolen afternoon during school holidays when nobody would come home early. Every moment ended exactly the same way. Everything folded away. Everything hidden. Everything erased. Until the next time. I wasn't chasing perfection. I wasn't trying to become someone else overnight. I was chasing a feeling I couldn't describe. Every time I looked into that mirror wearing something different, it wasn't excitement I felt first. It was recognition. Brief. Fragile. Gone before I could understand it. Then reality returned. Fold the clothes. Hide them. Become ordinary again. After my cousin discovered me, ordinary no longer existed. Word didn't spread through the family overnight. It spread through my own imagination first. Every conversation sounded suspicious. Every glance felt longer. Every laugh somewhere across the room convinced me people knew. Even when they didn't. Fear has a remarkable talent. It creates audiences where none exist. A week passed before my cousin visited again. I expected confrontation. Instead, he placed a small wrapped package on the kitchen table. "I found this at a charity shop." I stared at it. "I'm not taking it. You haven't even opened it." "I don't need to." He pushed it slightly closer. "I think you do." When he left, I spent nearly an hour staring at that package. Curiosity eventually defeated pride. Inside was a simple standing mirror, smaller than the one in my bedroom, older. The wooden frame had tiny scratches everywhere. Someone had written a single sentence across the back with faded black marker. "Face yourself before you fear yourself." I laughed bitterly. Easy advice. Nearly impossible to follow. For days, the mirror remained hidden under my bed. Then one rainy evening, when the house echoed with nothing except falling water against the windows, I pulled it out. I placed it opposite my chair. I didn't dress differently. I didn't change anything. I simply sat there, looking, really looking, not at clothes, not at appearances, at myself. For the first time, I realized how exhausted I looked. Not because of secrets, because of constant pretending. Every day had become a performance. Different audiences, different masks, different scripts. The mirror never applauded. It simply waited, as though it already knew I hadn't reached the hardest part yet. Because being caught wasn't the moment that changed everything. It was only the first crack. The real transformation would begin when I discovered that hiding from other people had been far easier than stopping myself from hiding from me. That little mirror became part of my daily routine without me even noticing. At first, I only glanced at it in passing. Then I started sitting in front of it for a few minutes each evening. No costumes, no pretending, no rehearsed expressions, just me. The strange thing about honesty is that it rarely arrives all at once. It comes quietly, one uncomfortable truth at a time. The first truth was simple. I wasn't afraid of being seen. I was afraid of being misunderstood. There was a difference, and it mattered more than I had ever realized. Weeks passed before my cousin mentioned that afternoon again. We were repairing an old bicycle in the garage when he suddenly asked, "Still hiding the mirror?" My hand stopped tightening the wrench. "It's in my room now." He nodded without looking at me. "Good." That was all. No lecture. No questions. Somehow, his silence carried more acceptance than 100 reassuring speeches ever could. It didn't erase my fear, but it gave me enough courage to examine it. I began writing in a notebook every night. Not long entries, just one sentence. Some nights I wrote, "Today I pretended everything was fine." Other nights, "Today I almost believed I could be myself." Eventually, one sentence appeared over and over again. The mirror only reflects what I bring to it. That became my quiet reminder. If I approached it with shame, it reflected shame. If I approached it with curiosity, it reflected possibility. The mirror hadn't changed. I had. Still, the outside world felt far less forgiving. At work, conversations about being normal drifted around the break room more often than I remembered. Friends joked about appearances. Relatives made casual comments during family dinners. None of those remarks were directed at me, yet every word landed like it was. I laughed when everyone else laughed. Inside, I shrank a little each time. Fear has an incredible imagination. It turns ordinary conversations into personal attacks. One afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from my cousin. "Coffee tomorrow?" I almost declined. Instead, I went. The cafe was quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a florist. Rain tapped gently against the windows while people hurried past outside. After a few minutes of ordinary conversation, he looked directly at me. You know what surprised me? I shook my head. I wasn't surprised by what I found. I frowned. I was surprised by how terrified you looked. I stared into my cup. "I thought you'd hate me." He smiled sadly. "No, I hated seeing someone believe they had to disappear." Those words stayed with me long after we left. Disappear. That was exactly what I had been doing. Not physically, emotionally. Every day, I erased little pieces of myself before anyone else had the chance to judge them. I had become my own harshest critic. That realization didn't magically solve everything. It simply changed the direction of the fight. Instead of battling who I was, I started questioning why I had been so determined to hide. The notebook filled with new thoughts. Fear speaks loudly. Truth whispers. Confidence isn't the absence of doubt. It's choosing honesty despite it. Months passed. Small changes appeared so gradually that nobody else noticed them. My posture straightened. I stopped apologizing before speaking. I smiled without wondering whether someone would question it. Most importantly, I no longer rushed past the mirror. I paused. Some mornings, I simply nodded at my reflection as though greeting an old friend. The phrase on the back of the mirror had changed its meaning. Face yourself before you fear yourself. It was no longer advice. It had become a promise. Then came the unexpected invitation that tested everything I had learned. A community arts festival announced a storytelling evening where ordinary people could share personal experiences about identity, growth, or overcoming fear. My cousin folded the leaflet and slid it across the table. "You should tell your story." I laughed immediately. "Absolutely not. You've already lived it. That doesn't mean I can speak about it." He looked at the mirror hanging near my bedroom door. "Maybe the mirror isn't meant to stay in your room forever." His words unsettled me. For days, I carried the application form in my backpack without filling it out. Every time I reached for a pen, fear stopped my hand. But another voice, quieter, steadier, stronger than before, kept repeating the same thought. You've spent years hiding from reflections. Maybe it's time to stop hiding from people. I didn't know whether I had enough courage. I only knew I was tired of letting fear decide who I could become. With trembling hands, I finally wrote my name at the top of the form. The moment the ink dried, I realized something extraordinary. The person who had once believed being caught meant the end of everything had just chosen to be seen on purpose. I nearly turned back 3 times on the walk to the community hall. The application form was already submitted. My name was printed in the program. There was no practical reason to leave, only fear. The old kind, the familiar kind. The voice that had spent years convincing me that silence was always safer than honesty. I stopped outside the entrance and caught my reflection in the glass door. For a brief second, I expected to see the frightened person who had hidden behind locked doors and hurriedly folded away every part of themselves before anyone could notice. Instead, I saw someone nervous, but still walking forward. That felt like progress. Inside, the hall buzzed with quiet conversations. Paintings lined the walls. Musicians tuned instruments in one corner. Families wandered between displays while volunteers arranged chairs beneath warm lights. Nobody looked at me twice. Nobody whispered. Nobody pointed. My imagination had always been a harsher audience than reality. When my name was announced, my heartbeat became so loud I wondered if the microphone would pick it up. I stepped onto the stage. The spotlight wasn't blinding. It was revealing. For a moment, I couldn't find any words. Then I noticed something sitting against the side of the stage. A decorative vintage mirror, part of the event's artwork. Its wooden frame looked remarkably similar to the little mirror that had quietly transformed my evenings. I smiled. It felt like an old friend had arrived without warning. I used to think mirrors judged people, I began. The room fell silent, but I eventually realized they don't create fear. I paused. They only reflect the fear we carry into them. No dramatic music. No perfect speech. Just honest memories. I spoke about pretending. About exhausting performances. About believing acceptance could only exist if every uncertain part of me remained hidden. I never exaggerated. I never asked anyone to agree with every feeling I had experienced. I simply described what it felt like to spend years trying to become invisible. As I spoke, something unexpected happened. People weren't staring. They were listening, not with curiosity, with empathy. When I finished, the applause arrived slowly, gentle, sincere. It wasn't the loudest applause I'd ever heard. It didn't need to be. For the first time in years, I wasn't measuring my worth by how well I had hidden. After the event, an elderly man approached me. "I've never lived your experience," he said, "but I know what it's like to spend years pretending to be someone everyone expected." A university student smiled and added, "Your story reminded me that fear changes its costume, but it's still fear." A mother thanked me for speaking honestly, because it reminded her to listen before making assumptions about anyone's journey. Different lives, different stories, the same human longing to be understood. Later that evening, my cousin caught up with me outside. So, I survived. He laughed. I wasn't asking that. He looked at me with the same calm certainty he had shown on the day everything began. "What do you see now?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, we stopped beside a shop window. Our reflections stared back at us through the glass. Months earlier, I would have searched for flaws. Years earlier, I would have looked away completely. Now, I simply looked. Not for perfection. Not for approval. Just recognition. "I see someone who's still learning," I finally said. He nodded. "That's the best answer you could have given." When I returned home, I walked into my room and picked up the little mirror. The scratches in the wooden frame were still there. The faded words on the back were still there. "Face yourself before you fear yourself." I smiled. The sentence hadn't changed. Its meaning had. At first, it had sounded like a challenge. Then it became a lesson. Now it had become a quiet reminder that growth isn't about becoming someone entirely new. It's about allowing yourself to become more honestly yourself, one brave decision at a time. I placed the mirror back on the shelf where sunlight reached every morning. Not hidden beneath the bed. Not tucked away inside a drawer. Out in the open. exactly where it belonged. Sometimes people ask whether being discovered was the worst day of my life. I always give the same answer. Being discovered wasn't what changed me. Being honest with myself did. Because the moment I stopped inventing excuses wasn't the moment I lost who I was. It was the moment I finally stopped losing myself. And every morning, when the first light touches that old wooden frame, the reflection waiting for me is no longer a stranger. It's simply the person who learned that courage isn't found in never being afraid. It's found in taking one more step forward, even when your hands are shaking. That's the reflection I carry with me now.